beauty, wealth, grace. Unless you possess all of these qualities as an elf, you are a failure. Failure! At least according to the standards of other elves, and let's be honest, they're the only ones that really matter. In Shadowrun, elves are the third most common type of metahuman. They also do a lot of porn. In this video, we're going to discuss an overview of the elves, their place in society, and we're going to talk about some rumors with them which are highly debated and very politicized. So, let's get into the elves of the Sixth World. Elves appeared for the first time in 2011. It was in this year that mothers started giving birth unexpectedly to elven babies as well as dwarven babies, but we're not talking about them in this video. Science began looking for an explanation as to why this was happening, and the answer they came up with was Ouj, unexplained genetic expression. Big long fancy words for basically saying they didn't know. Elves was not the medical moniker for what was happening to these children. However, Newsweek ended up coining the term, and this is what stuck because it would have fit with what was happening. In this world, I'm sure you had fantasy movies, you had games like Dungeons and Dragons being played, so elves wouldn't have been a big stretch of the imagination. It would just be shocking that they suddenly existed now. Elves seem to possess physically desirable traits. This made them very attractive generally, and they also seem to possess something else: longevity. Now, the medical community's desire to understand this longevity, of course, means that the elves are the best researched metatype. Now, there's many reasons in wanting to understand and unlock the secrets of expanding or extending one's life, and the most obvious ones would be to have humans live longer and have better lives with their families. But then on the flip side of that, you have reasons that could skew more towards a negative outcome. Just imagine what one person could achieve if they had a political drive, if they had a motive for money or changing a social or economic policy. If you are no longer bound by time, by death through old age, many of these goals could be achieved for better or for worse. And research into the elven longevity became very politicized. It also became very prejudiced. And if it wasn't for the actions of two of the primary elven nations, research may never have stopped. And those would be the nations of Tir Tairngire and Tir na Nog, and I will talk about those briefly later. However, what seems to be the common consensus is that an elf will live for approximately 400 years, barring getting murdered, disease, or something tragic happening. Now, one of the rumors that the elves just can't seem to shake is that even before the awakening, there were still some elves on the planet. If this is true, what this means is that the elven lifespan can actually be measured in centuries, or maybe they are immortal, although no science has actually been able to prove this. Now, if elves are the third most popular metahuman type, how common are they? Globally, they make up about 15% of the world's population. Now, this doesn't mean that 15% of every city is elvish population. It seems that when the UGE actually happened and elves became part of normal civilization, normal society, it happened disproportionately in several areas. Tir na Nog was one such place where more elves disproportionately appeared, and this would have been in the land formerly known as Ireland. And also within the Zulu nation of Africa, they saw a surge of elves that just happened naturally here. Tir Tairngire saw a post-awakening surge of elvish population, and that's only because most elves who discovered that this was going to be their home migrated there. Now, for some reason, elven culture seems to be a phenomenon. Every metatype, every metahuman has developed their own culture, their own way of life, their own way of being, but when it comes to the elves, it was much more pronounced. And it's because of this, the elves have had such an impact to pop culture, to major cities, to urban sprawl. There are many places dedicated to just elves. Many famous actors, musicians, entertainers, they will all stay in the elven districts, largely because many of them are elvish. If you're new here, my name's Nathaniel. I talk world lore around role-playing games so you can have a better and more in-depth experience with your players. If that's something you're interested in, I would love to have you join me at the table. And if you're getting some value out of the video today, hitting the like button really lets me know that you are, and it helps me with the algorithm. Life is not all glitz and glamour for the elves. They have had to deal with more than their fair share of crap, prejudice, as well as fetishization in some cases. Because elves are so physically desirable, there are entire groups of just regular humans who desire to be elves. They go under physical modification to alter their appearance to be more elf-like, and they can take this a little bit too far. Some of them have even condemned elves for not being elvish enough in their appearance or in their customs. And many can be found within the Matrix or maybe on your favorite Tridio because they're servicing the adult entertainment industry. The elves have also evolved their own language, known as Sperethiel. Nihengar Sperethiel. The language itself was allegedly reconstructed from a dead language from a dead civilization that passed pre-awakening. Sperethiel is a complex language, but it is quite melodic and song-like in its speech. The awakening refers to one event that happened that triggered a couple of changes. First off, magic returned back to the world, and this happened in 2011, right when the dwarves and the elves started appearing. That particular year was referred to as the Year of Chaos. It's also the triggering event for the changing of the world. The sixth world is the one that now has magic in it. And I know I got that very wrong in my last Shadowrun video. I apologize. Many of you called me out for that, so thank you. Sperethiel is known as the Elven language. However, not all elves actually speak it, and it's not limited to just the elves. There's a bit of irony here as well, in the sense that most of the masters of the Sperethiel language are either elvish posers or they grew up in an elvish nation. But there is still some large problems in dealing with the elves. I have largely understated the prejudice that they receive in day-to-day life, and I think it's time we talk about the problems of being an elf. Elves have developed a couple of cliches, and these are further propagated by the mainstream media of the sixth world. That would be that elves in general are snobby wannabe aristocrats, as well as tree-hugging hippies, sometimes referred to as dandelion eaters in a more derogatory term. And while yes, there is some truth to this, for the vast majority it's not the case. Another thing that's followed the elves around is that they are all vegetarian, or large amounts of them are vegetarian, and again, while this does happen to be true, it is not the case for all elves. But one of the main issues that can get an elf into trouble is not necessarily a cliche, but somewhat self-inflicted. This would be the proverbial elf arrogance. And it's not as black and white as you might think. When many people treat you in a very specific way, whether it's positive or negative, that tends to have an effect on a person's psyche. In the elf's case, because they are treated as superior to everyone else, they are more desirable physically, this can build up a huge ego within an elf and give them a "I'm better than you" complex. So it should be easy to understand why maybe an orc or a troll who have had significant difficulties integrating into human society, blending themselves in, you can see how maybe they would be a little tense or jealous around interactions with them. Fashion has even been influenced by the elf appearance. Elven models are considered highly desirable because of their fashion sense and just how clothes look on them. There are many fashion designers that tailor exclusively to elves, and then there are those who try to blend the elf aesthetic into human or other metahuman clothing. So with all this desirability and all this tension between the metahumans and even humanity itself, it should come as no surprise that there is no shortage of derogatory terms related to the elves. Knife-eared freak, dandelion eater, tree hugger, hey Keeb, short for the Keebler elf. In an attempt to escape these prejudices and to embrace the elven culture, they have formed their own nations. Tir Tairngara is in the western part of North America. Tir na Nog, as I mentioned, is in Ireland. The Zulu Nation in the Azanian Confederation, formerly known as the South African Republic. And the Duchy of Pomeroya in the northeast of the Allied German states. The Duchy of Pomeroya is the oldest known elvish settlement. It was founded in the year 2030, and it's one of the most polarizing states in the Alliance of German states. Tir na Nog is the center of the elf religion known as Paths of the Wheel. It is also the seat of the Seelie Court. And Tir Tairngire, known as the Land of Promise, as we mentioned, is in the western part of North America. It was founded by elves in the year 2035. It is almost exclusively an elven state. Its population is almost exclusively elven, but you will find humans and maybe a couple of other metahuman types here as well. And for 30 years, it was a very successful state, which is a little surprising considering that they ran on a version of neo-feudalism. But the High Prince and the Prince Council managed to keep things in line for quite some time. The Zulu nation is actually the largest nation of elves, and it is found on the African continent. The elves that live here are typically known for being quite isolationist. It is also the only one of its kind in Africa. Eronasta odornasta pishet imiroso ozidanastet. To learn more about Shadowrun and other metahumans, please click here. Thank you to all of my patrons for continuing to support me and the channel. All of your support is greatly appreciated. My name's Nathaniel. Thanks for stopping by, everyone.